The longevity diet after 60. 5 fruits that keep you strong, sharp, and independent. Before we begin, let me ask you something personal. Have you ever walked into a room and completely forgotten why? Not just once, but often enough that you start second guessing yourself. Have you ever stood at the top of the stairs just a little too long, waiting for your knees to trust you again? If you felt it, that quiet shift in your strength, your memory, your confidence, then this story might feel a little too familiar. Because for people like George, aging didn't come with a warning. It came quietly, like fog rolling in across familiar ground. George couldn't find his glasses. It wasn't the first time, but it felt different this time. Just 10 minutes ago, he was certain he'd placed them beside the coffee pot, or maybe on the nightstand, or perhaps on the kitchen counter where he'd left the newspaper. Now they were gone, and George stood barefoot on the cold tile floor, blinking at the soft winter light pushing through the blinds. He wasn't panicked, but he was still, and somewhere in that stillness was a question he hadn't let himself ask before. Is this how it starts? Outside, the world looked like it always had, on a late January morning in Vermont. Quiet, bone cold, and dusted with a layer of frost that clung to the porch railing like powdered sugar. Inside the house, the old wooden beams groaned softly with each breeze. The kettle let out a dull whistle forgotten on the stove. George turned it off without thinking, then stared at his hand as if it had acted on its own. He was 73 now, retired, widowed, living alone in the home he and Margaret had built together with their own hands nearly 3 decades ago. She passed 5 years earlier from a stroke. Since then, the house had grown quieter. He'd gotten used to it, or at least he'd told himself he had. Silence no longer felt sharp. It just hummed in the background, like an old refrigerator, constant and low. George had always been sharp. He worked in structural engineering, measuring, calculating, solving. He was the guy people called when they needed precision. But lately, he found himself searching for words mid-sentence, or walking into rooms without remembering why. Not always, just enough to notice, enough to feel it in his gut that something had changed. His doctor wasn't concerned. His vitals looked fine. Blood pressure was stable, no signs of anything serious. But George couldn't shake the feeling that his body, and worse his mind, was slowly slipping into neutral. Not crashing, not breaking, just coasting downward. He didn't like it. He didn't know what to do about it either. He tried little things, supplements, crossword puzzles, walking laps around the block even when his knees ached. He read an article online about eating more leafy greens, so he did. He cut back on red meat. He even tried meditating once, though he ended up falling asleep, sitting up on the couch. But the small lapses kept coming. Last week, he'd forgotten to turn off the burner. 2 days ago, he lost his keys and found them in the freezer. He laughed it off, but something inside him tightened. That night, he couldn't sleep. The worst part wasn't the forgetting. It was the fear that he might not be able to come back from it. George had never been afraid of aging. Wrinkles didn't bother him. He didn't mind the gray hair or the slower pace. What scared him was losing control, losing independence, becoming invisible in his own life. He didn't want to be the man people pitied. He wanted to be capable, alert. present, still himself. That morning, after finally finding his glasses in the laundry room of all places, George sat down at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee. The steam curled around his face like breath in cold air. He stared at the notepad sitting beside the salt shaker. It was a to-do list from 2 days ago, still untouched. But instead of adding new tasks, George picked up a pen and wrote a single question. What's still in my control? He stared at the words for a long time. Then slowly, with shaky handwriting, he began to list a few things. Sleep, movement, water, and food. He underlined food. George remembered something his doctor had mentioned offhand during his last appointment. How certain fruits were linked to stronger brain health, better mobility, even longevity. He hadn't paid much attention then. But now, as he sat in his quiet kitchen, feeling more aware of his own decline, he decided to dig deeper. Maybe the answers wouldn't come in a pill bottle. Maybe they'd come in something as simple as what he put on his plate. He didn't know it yet, but that moment right there at the table was the beginning of a new fight. Not against aging, but for clarity, for strength, for the right to stay in charge of his own life. And it would all begin with 5 surprising fruits. If you've ever felt like George, like something inside you is shifting, even if no one else sees it, keep watching, because what you eat after 60 might just be the most powerful medicine you've never considered. Shall we begin? The doctor's office was too bright. George never liked this part of town. Glass buildings, smooth tile floors, background music playing some instrumental version of a Beatles song. It all felt too polished, too sterile. Still, he made the drive every 6 months, just like he had since turning 65. He didn't expect anything dramatic, but something in his gut told him this visit would be different. Dr. Levine was younger than George by at least 25 years, with kind eyes and a habit of speaking quickly. She glanced at the blood panel, tapped her pen against the edge of the desk, and smiled in that practiced way doctors do when they're trying not to scare you. Your numbers are mostly fine, she said. Cholesterol's manageable. Blood pressure's a little up, but not alarming. No signs of diabetes or major cardiac risk. She paused, then leaned in a little. But you're running low on certain key nutrients: magnesium, B12, potassium. Your muscle tone has dropped more than expected for someone your age, and I'm seeing the start of what we call mild cognitive slowing. George raised an eyebrow. Mild what? She folded her hands. It's not dementia. You're not losing your mind. But we are seeing early signs that your brain function is aging faster than the rest of you. Memory, focus, balance, it's all connected. And if we don't make changes now, it could get worse. He didn't like the way that sounded. He especially didn't like the word slowing. Slowing meant slipping. Slowing meant losing grip. He tried to act unfazed, but she saw through it. George, this isn't about just staying alive. This is about staying independent, she said gently. If we wait until there's a major problem, it's harder to reverse. But right now, we can work with this. She tapped her tablet. Let's start with your diet. George couldn't help but chuckle. So, it's come to that, bananas and berries, Dr. Levine smiled. Not all fruits are created equal. Some do more than give you vitamins. Some actually protect the brain, repair inflammation, support muscle function, even guard against heart failure, and most seniors don't eat enough of them. He left the clinic that afternoon with a strange mix of emotions: relief that he wasn't sick, frustration that something was still wrong, and somewhere deep inside, a flicker of hope that he might be able to do something about it. Back at home, George sat with a pen and a pad of paper. Across the top, he wrote, "If food can harm, it can also heal." He thought about everything Dr. Levine had said: the forgotten names, the lost balance, the weakness in his legs when he stood too quickly. It all lined up. But if it had taken years to get here, could he really change anything now? He didn't know, but he was willing to try. He got up, opened the fridge, and stared at the half-empty shelves. Some leftover soup, a carton of milk, old mustard. Not a single fruit in sight. For a man who used to grow his own tomatoes, the irony wasn't lost on him. The next morning, George did something he hadn't done in months, maybe years. He went to the farmer's market. It was only a 20-minute drive, but it felt like a journey. The parking lot was crowded with SUVs, slow-moving couples, and parents chasing toddlers with sticky fingers. George walked past booths overflowing with oranges, plums, green apples, and hand-painted signs that read things like memory-boosting blueberries and heart-loving pomegranate juice. He stopped at a stand, run by a woman about his daughter's age. Her display was neat bunches of kale tubs of washed berries, sliced avocado on ice. She caught him eyeing the blueberries. "Best thing you can eat if you want to stay sharp," she said with a wink. George smiled. "So I've heard." He bought a pint, then a bag of apples, a single ripe avocado, a bottle of pomegranate juice. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Later that evening, he washed the blueberries carefully and placed a small handful into a bowl. He added a few slices of apple, half an avocado, lightly salted. He sat at the kitchen table and ate slowly, thinking not about flavor, but about function. He wasn't chasing youth. He wasn't looking for a miracle. He just wanted to feel like himself again. It was a quiet turning point. No fanfare. No immediate results. But deep down, George had made a decision. He was done surrendering his strength to age without a fight. And the first blow came from a bowl of fruit. Coming up, you'll discover what happened when George committed to trying 5 powerful fruits, each chosen for its unique role in protecting memory, rebuilding strength, improving balance, and extending independence. If you're over 60 and feel like your body's giving you quiet warnings, don't miss what's next. Because the difference between decline and resilience might be on your plate. The fall wasn't dramatic. There was no crash, no scream, no broken bones. Just a soft thud, a sound barely louder than the ticking clock on the kitchen wall. But to George, it felt like the ground had betrayed him. It happened late on a Thursday night. He'd gotten up from his recliner too fast. Maybe he hadn't drunk enough water. Maybe his legs were weaker than he realized. One moment he was standing. The next he was on the cold tile floor, his elbow pressed against the baseboard, his heart pounding like a distant drum. He didn't cry out, didn't call anyone. That would mean admitting something had gone wrong. So he stayed there. For a long time, the house was quiet as always. The kind of quiet that used to feel like peace, now filled with an echo that felt too much like loneliness. He stared up at the ceiling fan, unmoving above him. His chest rose and fell in short, sharp breaths. He wasn't hurt, but he was shaken. That was his worst fear. Not dying. No, George had made peace with that long ago. He'd watched Margaret go slowly, then all at once. He knew that death came for everyone. What terrified him was this falling alone and having no one know. No one to pick him up. No one to notice if he didn't answer the phone the next morning. What terrified him wasn't the pain. It was the silence that followed. He eventually pulled himself up, using the sideboard. Every muscle in his arms strained. His legs trembled. The room spun a little before settling. He leaned against the wall, palms flat, trying to steady his breath. He made it to the couch and sat down, clenching his jaw, embarrassed by a house with no one else in it. And then something he hadn't felt in years, rage, not at himself, not at his body, but at the idea that this was just supposed to be normal. You get older, you get weaker, people said. You slow down, you lose things, you need help, you fade. George stared at the window, his reflection faint in the glass, and whispered, "I'm not ready to fade." That night, he didn't sleep. He sat with a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, sipping lukewarm water, staring at his kitchen table, on the notepad where he'd once scribbled, "What's still in my control?" He added 2 more words, underlined in bold. "My fight." The next morning, George did something different. He didn't just eat the blueberries. He didn't just sip the pomegranate juice or slice the avocado. He made a plan. He printed articles from medical journals, ones that talked about anthocyanins in blueberries, improving memory, or how quercetin in apples reduced inflammation in aging brains. He watched a lecture from a neurologist explaining how oxidative stress slowly deteriorates neurons and how the right fruit compounds could slow or even reverse that process. This wasn't just food anymore. It was strategy. It was armor. He built what he called his fruit protocol. 5 fruits, 5 rolls, 1 for his brain, 1 for his heart, 1 for his gut, 1 for his muscles, 1 for everything in between. Margaret would have teased him, called it George's health crusade, but he could almost hear her voice cheering him on, because for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel passive. He didn't feel like aging was happening to him. He felt like he was showing up in the fight, boots on sleeves rolled. The fear hadn't disappeared. He was still alone. He still moved slower than he wanted. But now, every morning began with a bowl of something that made him feel like he had a say in how the rest of his life would go. He even taped a small note to the fridge right next to the grocery list. Eat to remember, eat to walk, eat to stay. George, there was no guarantee this would fix everything. He knew that. But it gave him something stronger than certainty. It gave him purpose. And for a man who once lay on his kitchen floor, questioning everything that was more than enough, summing up, you'll discover the 5 fruits George chose and what makes each one a quiet powerhouse for seniors, from the memory-sharpening effect of blueberries to the gut-healing enzyme in papaya. You'll see how the simplest foods can protect what matters most: your independence, your clarity, and your strength. If you're over 60 or love someone who is, this next part could change everything. George never liked routines. At least, not the ones that felt forced, like setting alarms or taking pills that promised too much. But this was different. This felt like a choice. Every morning before the coffee finished brewing, he stood at the counter and carefully laid out 5 small bowls. Each bowl was assigned to one fruit. Each fruit had a purpose. Not a snack, not a treat, a mission. The first bowl was filled with blueberries, plump dark and cold from the fridge. It was more than just a handful of berries. It was his shield for the mind. He had read, and then reread, the Harvard study. Older adults who ate blueberries at least twice a week showed significantly slower rates of cognitive decline. The compound behind this anthocyanins deep blue antioxidants that cross the blood-brain barrier and help protect neurons from aging. George ate them slowly, one by one, as if he were refueling memory itself. "Eat to remember," he whispered, just like the note on his fridge said. The second bowl held thin slices of avocado. He never thought of avocado as a fruit until now. It felt more like a butter substitute, but this creamy green fruit was loaded with monounsaturated fats which supported brain health and lowered bad cholesterol. Even more important for George, avocados were rich in potassium, which helped reduce muscle cramping and supported strength. He didn't need to understand the biochemistry. All he knew was this: ever since adding half an avocado to his lunch, he'd stopped using the armrest to push himself out of chairs. The third bowl was ruby red pomegranate areoles glistening like little jewels. At first, he wasn't sure about the taste. Too tangy, but the benefits too powerful to ignore. Pomegranate was one of the richest sources of polyphenols, natural compounds known to reduce inflammation and protect heart health. For seniors, it meant improved circulation, lower blood pressure, and protection against oxidative stress in the arteries. George poured a bit of pomegranate juice into a glass and raised it like a silent toast to his heart, and the woman it once beat strongest for. The fourth fruit was a surprise: papaya. Not always easy to find in Vermont, but he managed. Papaya had something no other fruit quite offered: papain, a natural enzyme that supported digestion, reduced bloating, and eased joint inflammation. He'd spent years thinking that digestive trouble and joint stiffness were just part of getting older. But since adding fresh papaya to his breakfast 3 times a week, George had stopped reaching for the antacids. His knees felt looser. There was no magic, just gentle relief from a fruit that had been hiding in plain sight. And finally, in the fifth bowl, a crisp red apple. The most ordinary of fruits, and yet maybe the most important. Apples were rich in quercetin, a powerful flavonoid known for its anti-inflammatory effects on both the brain and the lungs. Quercetin also helped reduce the risk of type 2 diabetes and supported immune function. But for George, eating an apple wasn't about any of that. It was about the ritual. It was about slicing it slowly in the afternoon sunlight, feeling the crunch between his teeth and remembering what it felt like to take care of himself, fully, deliberately. One bowl for memory, one for muscle, one for the heart, one for digestion, one for strength. Day after day, he followed the protocol, not perfectly, not obsessively, just consistently. He still had coffee, still had bread. But now, these 5 fruits had become anchors in his day, silent, nourishing reminders that he was still choosing how he aged. The changes didn't come all at once, but they came. By the end of the second week, George noticed that he was sleeping through the night without waking. His dreams had returned, soft and strange like whispers from younger years. By week 3, he felt steadier, walking across the porch. He didn't grip the railing as tightly. His breath didn't catch on the last stair. By week 4, something unexpected happened. He forgot he was trying. It wasn't a diet anymore. It was just life. Neighbors started to notice too. His friend Dennis from the coffee shop said, "You look sharper, George. What's your secret?" He just smiled. 5 fruits every day. That's it. But deep down, George knew it was more than the fruit. It was the shift that happened when he decided he was still worth taking care of, still worth effort, still worth a protocol, even if no one else could see the changes but him. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel like a man slowly disappearing. He felt like someone who had come back home to himself. In the final chapter, we'll revisit what changed for George and how these 5 simple fruits led to something even deeper: clarity, connection, and confidence after 70. If you've ever wondered whether food can do more than just fuel you, if it can actually bring you back to life, don't miss what happens next. It was early, not quite dawn. George stood in front of the window, a steaming mug of coffee in his hand, wrapped in the same navy robe Margaret had given him 15 Christmases ago. Outside, the trees were still, the kind of quiet that makes the birdsong feel louder when it finally arrives. He didn't rush anymore. He didn't check his phone. He just stood there, watching the frost lift from the porch railing as the sunlight crept in slowly, like an old friend who no longer knocked before entering. Something felt different, not just in his body, though. Yes, his balance had improved, and his mind felt clearer than it had in months, but this difference was deeper. It was the kind that lives just beneath the surface of a man's daily life, the kind that changes the way you carry your shoulders or how long you hold eye contact when you talk to the cashier. It wasn't pride. Not quite. But it was close. He'd gone from feeling like someone life was slowly forgetting to someone worth remembering again, even to himself. Later that morning, George opened the top drawer of his writing desk. Inside was a leather-bound notebook, clean pages, no title. He uncapped his pen and began to write. Not about symptoms, not about test results, but about moments. The way his fingers no longer trembled when buttoning his shirt. The way his legs felt firm under him when stepping out of the shower. How he remembered to water the plants without setting a reminder. How he stood up from his recliner with one smooth motion and no sound of complaint from his joints. They were small things, but they were stacking. And somewhere between the blueberry bowl and the evening apple, a man had found his footing again. He wasn't chasing youth. That thought had long passed. There was nothing appealing about pretending to be 40 again. But what he was chasing, no reclaiming, was something far more essential. His rhythm, his clarity, his control. He cleaned the house that day, not because it needed it, but because he wanted to see the floorboards gleam. He moved with purpose, sweeping dust that had settled not just on furniture, but on habits. He played jazz while he worked, humming along to the bass lines like he used to. It felt good, honest, quietly victorious. By afternoon, George was sitting on the porch with his notepad resting on his lap, a slice of crisp apple in hand. The wind had warmed, the sky opened a little. It was one of those days where everything looked more vivid, as if the world had been sharpened by rest. A neighbor walked by with their golden retriever. They waved. "You're up early," the neighbor called out. George smiled, lifting his apple, up and alert. He liked that word, alert. Not just awake, not just alive. Present, sharp enough to feel the world as it passed through him, not just around him. There were still slow days, of course. Some mornings, the stiffness returned. Some names still danced just out of reach. But he no longer feared those moments. Because now he had a map, a method, a way to find his way back, one bite at a time. And it wasn't just about fruit. It was about decision. Each bowl had reminded him that even at 73, even in grief, even after slips and scares, he could still decide how to show up, how to nourish what remained, how to build strength not by avoiding aging, but by standing in the middle of it and saying, "I'm still here. I still get to choose." As evening came, George cooked dinner. Nothing fancy, grilled chicken, a side of sweet potatoes, and a small bowl of papaya to finish. He poured a glass of water and placed it on a linen napkin. No distractions, no background TV, just him and the quiet. And he ate slowly, not because he had to, but because he could. He didn't rush to clean the plate. He didn't fill the silence with noise. He let himself feel full, not just in his stomach, but in his life. After washing the dishes, he returned to the window just as he had that morning. The reflection in the glass looked back with steadier eyes, softer. Yes, older, definitely. But there was something anchored now, something peaceful. The man in the glass had not been rescued. He had rebuilt. And each fruit, each habit, each choice, it was a brick in that foundation. He reached for the fridge magnet and read the note again. Eat to remember. Eat to walk. Eat to stay. George. He smiled. Not because it was clever, but because it was true. And as the night folded in and the stars blinked on in the cold sky above, George turned off the kitchen light. He didn't feel like he was fading anymore. He felt like he had found his way back.